Good morning, this is Tamara Haddock, and this is my presentation for my short story adaptation, Doorways to Nowhere, based off Edgar Allan Poe. Doorways to Nowhere is a Gothic horror story structured as 3 therapy sessions and a final journal entry, where a mother confesses to her therapist about the death of her child and the disappearance of her husband, and then ultimately her plan to return to the house. The Poe connections that I borrowed were The Telltale Heart, which gave me an unreliable narrator who insisted on her own sanity while confessing. The Fall of the House of Usher gave me a house that's alive, hungry, and buries the family inside. The Cask of Amontillado gave me the murderer concealed within the walls, a justified murder who was not discovered, and then I used Annabelle Lee to give me the love beyond death, the mother who descends to the well not to die but to be with her child. This adaptation matters because Poe's narrators are almost exclusively men driven by pride, ego, and obsession. The Telltale Heart narrator kills because the old man's eye offends him. Montezor kills over a perceived insult. Roderick Usher collapses under the weight of his family's legacy. There are stories about men who destroy because they can't control what disturbs them. My narrator is different because her primary motivation is maternal grief. She's not driven by pride or ego. She's driven by the failure to protect her child. The same mechanics, unreliable confession, heightened senses, psychological horror in a house that consumes its inhabitants, operates completely differently when the narrator is a mother instead of a madman. This adaptation reveals Poe's techniques aren't gendered. The horror works regardless of who's holding it. The reason for the horror changes everything about how it's experienced. It's easier to connect with a horror where you can see yourself committing the same acts. So I actually went back to my childhood home that inspired this story, that had doors that didn't go anywhere. A lot of things were changed in it. Some of the details that I got from the house, though, made it into the story, like the back door having 5 lock marks where locks had been taken off. The rooms were empty. Some of the lines that I wrote while I was in there, I took my journal with me and just sat in the house and wrote, were things that remain hold the shape of the things that have gone. The being in the setting gave me an immersion that just sitting at the house and writing wouldn't have. I went to a place that felt abandoned, that felt empty, and one that held my own childhood in the ruins and the ghost. One of the lines that I wrote in my journal whenever I was there was, I remember it bigger, but it's so small. How can it contain so much of me when my present self barely fits inside? Was there ever more than this, or was I always less? And then there's a couple lines that didn't make it in, but kind of informed the piece. Echoes of footsteps and echoes of memories. The ruins of innocence. It's, where did my childhood go? Who was I in so small this place? Tried to return to use to a place that felt safe. Poe wrote from imagination in a way I wrote from proximity. I have kids. I recognize that if something happened to one of them, it would absolutely destroy me. And I went for what is the worst thing that I could imagine happening, and it is the loss of a child through someone else's neglect. This kind of explored the line between maternal grief and external blame. How much does she blame herself? How much does she blame the father? How much does she blame the house itself? And in conjunction with how much does she blame the house, how much does she blame the members of her family who had started projects in the house and never finished? How much of the blame falls on the house being incomplete and those who left it as incomplete? Poe couldn't have written this story, not because he lacked skill, because clearly he's one of the best horror writers ever, but it's perspective. Poe could not have written the specific horror of a mother's grief, of leaving your child with someone who fails them, of the guilt of not being there when something happens to your kid. Their experiences that Poe's narrators couldn't have accessed because they are men who are driven by different motivations. Adaptation lets a new voice say the same thing in new ways. What's logic compared to a mother's broken heart is a line from this that I'm very proud of, that while it kind of echoes Poe, I can't imagine it being in one of his stories. In Doorways to Nowhere, the house is always incomplete. Every generation started something and didn't finish it. The adaptation is the completion. We took Poe's architecture, Poe's themes and narrative structure and rhythms, and we built something from it that he wouldn't have. It brings the same kind of horror and psychological trauma to a new audience under different circumstances. It keeps it